The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Sophia Reyes moved quietly through the living room, dusting the expensive art pieces that lined the walls. At 28, she had perfected the art of being invisible. 3 years of working as a live-in housekeeper for one of New York's wealthiest men had taught her exactly that. Her employer, Alexander Grant, was still asleep. The tech mogul rarely woke before 10, especially after nights like yesterday when he'd been out at some charity gala until the early hours. Sophia preferred these quiet mornings when she could work undisturbed, listening to classical music through her small earbuds, her one personal indulgence. Today, she hummed softly to Rachmaninoff as she worked, her fingers occasionally pausing mid-dust to tap out the complex piano sections in the air. Old habits died hard. "You missed a spot," came a voice from behind her. Sophia jumped, yanking out her earbuds and spinning around. Alexander stood there in his silk robe, coffee in hand, eyebrow raised. At 36, he had the confident posture of someone who had never worried about money a day in his life. "Sorry, Mr. Grant," she said, lowering her eyes. "I didn't hear you come in." He gestured vaguely toward a crystal vase. "That needs polishing. And don't forget we have guests tonight. 12 people, the usual setup." Without waiting for her response, he walked to his home office, already on his phone arranging some $1 million deal. Sophia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. These brief interactions were typical, him barely looking at her, giving orders rather than having conversations. What Alexander didn't know, what nobody in his wealthy circle knew, was that Sophia Reyes wasn't just another immigrant worker grateful for a job. Back home in Colombia, before her father's illness had drained their savings, she had been somebody. The old baby grand piano tucked away in the corner of Alexander's living room, more a showpiece than an instrument, called to her every day. He never played it. None of his friends played it. It sat there collecting dust, which she carefully removed each morning, fighting the urge to lift the cover and touch the keys. Sophia returned to the kitchen to prepare Alexander's breakfast. The spacious cooking area with its professional-grade appliances was her domain. Here at least she felt some sense of control. As she sliced fresh fruit, her mind wandered back to the concert hall in Bogotá where, at 19, she had performed with the National Youth Orchestra. The memory was like a photo fading at the edges. The applause, the flowers, her father's proud smile. "Sophia, where's my blue tie?" "The Armani one?" Alexander's voice crackled through the penthouse intercom system, jolting her back to reality. "Second drawer of your wardrobe left side, Mr. Grant," she replied. She had organized his closet by color, designer, and occasion, a system he never acknowledged but relied upon daily. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of tasks. Sophia changed linens, prepared the dining room, and ordered flowers for tonight's dinner party. Alexander had mentioned it was important, something about music industry executives and potential investors for his new streaming platform. By afternoon, the caterers arrived. Sophia supervised them quietly, making sure they didn't disturb Alexander, who was on a video call in his office. The head chef, Paulo, had worked with her many times before. "How's life with Mr. Personality?" he whispered as they arranged appetizers. Sophia shrugged. "The pay is good. He's rarely home. I can send money to my family. Still, to be treated like you're invisible." Paulo shook his head. "It's fine," she said, though they both knew it wasn't. "Did you hear from your daughter? The music school application?" Paulo's face lit up. "She got in." "Your advice on her audition piece made all the difference." Sophia smiled genuinely for the first time that day. She had spent hours helping Paulo's teenage daughter prepare a piece for her application to a performing arts high school. The girl had talent but needed guidance on technique, guidance Sophia could provide from her years of training at the National Conservatory. Before her world had collapsed, Sophia had been on track to become a concert pianist. Magazines in Bogotá had called her Colombia's rising star. Then her father's heart attack came, followed by complicated surgery and months of recovery. The family savings vanished into medical bills. Her mother took extra cleaning jobs. Sophia's younger siblings needed school supplies, food, shelter. The decision had been simple, if heartbreaking. Sophia put her music career on hold, accepted her aunt's offer to help her get to New York, and found work that paid well enough to send money home. The fact that this meant cleaning homes rather than playing concert halls was just how life had turned out. "Mr. Grant has no idea, does he?" Paolo asked, nodding toward the piano in the corner. Sophia shook her head. "Why would he care? To him, I'm just the woman who makes his bed and cooks his meals." "His loss," Paolo said, squeezing her shoulder before returning to the kitchen. By 6 o'clock, the penthouse was transformed. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. Candles waited to be lit. The long dining table was set with fine china and crystal that sparkled under the chandelier. Sophia had prepared the bar with top-shelf liquors and wines from Alexander's extensive collection. She was arranging the last of the wine glasses when Alexander emerged from his bedroom, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than she earned in 3 months. "Is everything ready?" he asked, adjusting his cufflinks, platinum with small diamonds, a gift from some ex-girlfriend. "Yes, Mr. Grant. The caterers will serve at 7:30. Drinks and appetizers are ready for when your guests arrive at 7. He nodded, then paused, looking at her for perhaps the first time that day. "You should change. Wear the service uniform for tonight." The service uniform was something Alexander had ordered. For special events, a plain black dress with a white apron that made Sophia look like she'd stepped out of a 1950s movie about domestic help. She hated it, but she nodded and went to her small room off the kitchen to change. As she buttoned the stiff collar, Sophia caught her reflection in the mirror. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. Her brown eyes looked tired. Sometimes she barely recognized herself anymore. Where was the young woman who had once commanded standing ovations? She took a small photograph from her dresser drawer. Her family gathered around her after a performance, her father's arm around her shoulders, her mother beaming with pride. This was why she was here. Her father was better now. Her youngest brother was in university because of the money she sent home, and her sister's wedding last year had been beautiful. It was worth it. The doorbell rang at 7 on the dot. Sophia tucked the photo away and straightened her apron. The guests were exactly what she expected. Wealthy, important people who looked through her rather than at her as she took their coats and served drinks. Among them were 2 famous music producers, a violinist who had recently performed at Lincoln Center, and the head of a major record label. They all accepted the champagne Sophia offered without a word of thanks. From the kitchen, she watched them mingle. The conversation drifted between business deals, recent vacations to exclusive resorts, and industry gossip. Occasionally, someone would mention a concert or performance, and Sophia would find herself pausing to listen before catching herself and returning to work. The grand piano in the corner drew the attention of the violinist, a middle-aged woman in an expensive dress. "Beautiful instrument," she commented to Alexander. "Steinway, isn't it?" "Pre-war?" Alexander nodded, pleased with her recognition of its value. 1939. Belonged to a European duke or something before I acquired it. "Do you play?" she asked. Alexander laughed. "No time for hobbies. It's more of an investment piece." Sophia bit her lip as she arranged dessert plates in the kitchen. An investment piece. The thought of that magnificent instrument sitting unused made her heart ache. As she worked, her fingers moved unconsciously, playing an imaginary keyboard on the countertop. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece she had been practicing when her father fell ill. Her muscle memory was still perfect after all these years. "Hey, you with the plates," called one of the guests, a man with a loud voice and too many rings on his fingers. "More champagne over here." Sophia grabbed a bottle and hurried over, filling his glass without meeting his eyes. As she poured, she overheard Alexander talking business with the record label executive. "The streaming platform needs something unique," the executive was saying. "Everyone's got algorithms recommending music. What makes yours different?" "We're focusing on discovering hidden talent," Alexander replied confidently. "People who might never get a chance otherwise. It's about democratizing the industry." Sophia nearly laughed at the irony as she moved away from the table. Here was Alexander, talking about discovering hidden talent, while completely oblivious to the fact that someone who had once been featured in classical music magazines was folding his napkins and polishing his silverware. Later, as she served the main course, the conversation turned to a recent competition for young pianists. "The winner was technically perfect, but lacked soul," said the violinist. You can teach technique, but you can't teach passion. Agreed, said one of the producers. When I sign artists, I look for that spark, that something special that can't be manufactured. Sophia felt a familiar ache in her chest as she listened. Once upon a time, her teachers had praised her for exactly that, playing with both technical precision and emotional depth. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to wonder what might have been. As the night wore on and the wine flowed freely, Sophia remained in the background, clearing plates, refilling glasses, and keeping everything running smoothly. The guests grew louder, their laughter more frequent. They continued to look past her, through her, as if she were just another piece of furniture in Alexander's expensive collection. What they didn't see was how she moved in time with the background music Alexander had selected for the evening. They didn't notice how her eyes lingered on the piano each time she passed it. They had no idea that the woman serving their coffee had once been called a prodigy, and Sophia was fine with that. She had made her choice years ago. Family over fame, responsibility over dreams. Some days were harder than others, but she never regretted it. Still, as she watched these powerful music industry figures discussing talent and opportunity, while she stood invisible in the corner, she couldn't help but wonder if paths not taken might somehow find a way of crossing with the one she was on. Little did she know, fate had a surprise waiting just around the corner. The dinner party was in full swing by the time dessert was served. Sophia moved between the kitchen and dining room with practiced ease, carrying plates of chocolate soufflé that the chef had prepared. The conversation had grown louder as the evening progressed, fueled by expensive wine and industry gossip. "I've heard that Westfield Symphony is desperate for a pianist for their winter showcase," said the woman in the red dress, a talent agent Sophia had overheard introducing herself as Diane. Their regular got signed for a European tour and left them hanging. "That's what happens when you don't lock down contracts," laughed Alexander, swirling his wine glass. The ruby liquid caught the light from the chandelier above. "Always get everything in writing." Sophia slipped around the table, collecting empty glasses. These people lived in a different world, one where opportunities were plentiful, and choices were luxuries to be enjoyed rather than burdens to be carried. "Speaking of pianists," said the record label executive, a heavy-set man named Richard who had barely acknowledged Sophia all evening. "That brings me back to this streaming platform idea of yours, Alexander. How exactly will you find this hidden talent you mentioned?" Alexander launched into an explanation of algorithms and user-generated content, ideas he'd been developing with his tech team. Sophia had overheard enough of his business calls to know he was exaggerating the platform's readiness. It was barely past the concept. "Sachin, the problem with classical music," interrupted a thin man with silver hair, the director of the New York Philharmonic, "is that true talent is becoming increasingly rare. Conservatories are producing technically proficient players, but where is the passion? The soul?" A murmur of agreement rippled around the table. Sophia kept her eyes down as she placed a coffee cup in front of the director. She'd heard this complaint countless times during her years at the conservatory. Older generations lamenting the supposed lack of passion in younger musicians. It was nothing new. "That reminds me," said Diane, pointing toward the corner of the living room. "Is that a Steinway? It looks like a pre-war model." "Good eye," said Alexander, pleased. 1939, one of my better acquisitions." "Does anyone play?" asked the director, glancing around the table. Alexander shook his head. "It came with the penthouse. Previous owner was some European aristocrat with more money than talent, from what I heard." "A shame to let such an instrument sit unused," said the director. He turned to the group. "Any hidden pianists among us?" A few guests laughed nervously, but no one volunteered. The violinist from earlier in the evening sighed. "I can play basic accompaniment, but nothing worthy of that instrument." "I took lessons as a kid," offered Richard from the record label. "Hated every minute of it, but my mother insisted. I could probably remember chopsticks if pressed." Everyone laughed, and Sophia allowed herself a small smile as she cleared the last of the dessert plates. The grand piano in the corner had indeed been neglected since she'd started working for Alexander. She dusted it daily, but the cover over the keys was rarely lifted. "Come on," Richard urged Diane. "Give us a demonstration." Richard protested, but the other guests joined in, their voices growing louder with encouragement. Fine," he relented, standing with an exaggerated sigh. "But don't say I didn't warn you." The group moved from the dining area to the living room, and Sophia used the opportunity to clear more dishes. From the kitchen, she heard awkward, plunking notes as Richard attempted to play. The beautiful Steinway deserved better, but she kept her thoughts to herself as she loaded the dishwasher. "God, that's awful," she heard Alexander say, followed by laughter from the guests. "You weren't kidding about being bad." "Told you," Richard replied good-naturedly. "Haven't touched a piano in 20 years. Sophia carried a tray of after-dinner drinks into the living room, where the guests had settled on the plush sofas and armchairs. Richard had abandoned the piano bench and was now nursing his wounded pride with a glass of scotch. The piano lid remained open, almost like an invitation. "Maybe we should hire a pianist for the next dinner party," suggested Alexander, accepting a drink from Sophia's tray. "Someone to provide background music." "Or," said Richard with a mischievous glint in his eye, "maybe your staff has hidden talents." He looked directly at Sophia for the first time all evening. "How about you? Play anything?" Sophia froze, the tray still in her hands. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She felt her cheeks grow warm. I should finish clearing the table," she said quietly. "Oh, come on," pressed Richard. "I made a fool of myself." "Your turn." Alexander laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Don't be ridiculous, Richard. She's the help, not entertainment." Sophia felt a familiar sting at his words. 3 years of working in his home, and this was how he saw her, as the help. Not as a person with a history, with dreams, with talents of her own. Although, Alexander continued, his voice taking on a playful edge that Sophia recognized as danger, "it would be amusing. What do you say, Sophia? Want to show my guests your hidden talents?" The room grew quiet. Sophia knew she should smile politely, decline, and return to the kitchen where she belonged. That would be the sensible thing to do. The safe thing. But something in Alexander's smug expression, the casual way he dismissed her, ignited a spark inside her that had been dormant for too long. "I might know a little," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Clearly, he hadn't expected her to accept the challenge. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair. "This should be interesting." "Please, enlighten us." Sophia carefully set down her tray on a side table. The guests watched her with curious expressions, some amused, some embarrassed on her behalf, a few simply interested in this unexpected turn of events. The director of the Philharmonic wore a kind but skeptical look, as if preparing to be polite about a poor performance. "Go on, then," urged Alexander when Sophia hesitated. "Show us what you've got." He turned to his guests with a conspiratorial smile. "This ought to be good for a laugh, that did it." Sophia straightened her shoulders and walked to the piano, her heart pounding in her chest. It had been years since she'd performed for anyone besides herself, humming quietly while working or tapping out rhythms on countertops when no one was watching. But her fingers remembered. Her body remembered. She sat down on the bench, adjusting her position by habit. The black and white keys gleamed under the soft lighting. She placed her hands gently on the cool ivory, a greeting to an old friend. "I'll even make it worth your while," Alexander called out, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Play something halfway decent and I'll give you a bonus in your next paycheck." The guests tittered nervously. Sophia closed her eyes briefly. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. "What are you going to play for us?" asked Diane, her voice gentler than before. Sophia considered for a moment. What piece would speak to who she truly was? What would tell her story? "Chopin," she said softly. Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The director's eyebrows rose. It was an ambitious choice. One of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire, requiring both technical skill and emotional depth. Sophia knew it was a risk, but if she was going to do this, she would do it properly. She took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes filled the room. Hesitant at first as her fingers reacquainted themselves with the weight of real piano keys rather than imaginary ones. But muscle memory is a powerful thing, and within moments Sophia was lost in the music. The ballade told a story, beginning with a melancholy introduction that gave way to a tender, questioning melody. Sophia let her fingers dance across the keys, building the narrative as Chopin had intended. The piece grew in intensity, the runs and arpeggios flowing from her hands as naturally as breathing. She forgot about the room full of strangers watching her. Forgot about Alexander and his smug challenge. Forgot about the uniform she wore and the dishes waiting to be washed. In this moment, she was Sophia Reyes, pianist, the person she had been born to be. When the music reached its passionate climax, her hands flew across the keyboard with precision and power. The final dramatic section poured out of her. Years of suppressed emotion finding release through Chopin's notes. The last chord hung in the air, resonating through the room and through Sophia's very being. For a moment, there was complete silence. She kept her eyes closed, afraid to break the spell. When she finally looked up, the expressions on the faces around her stole her breath. Alexander's mouth hung open in shock. Richard from the record label was leaning forward in his seat, eyes wide. Diane had one hand pressed to her chest, but it was the director of the Philharmonic whose reaction meant the most. He was staring at Sophia as if seeing a ghost or perhaps a revelation. "Where," he asked in a hushed voice, "did you learn to play like that?" Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she lowered them to her lap. "The National Conservatory in Bogota," she answered, her voice stronger now. "Before I came to New York." "You're not just good," said the director, standing and walking toward the piano. "That was extraordinary. Your technique, your interpretation." He shook his head in disbelief. "I don't understand," Alexander interrupted, looking between Sophia and the director. "You're saying my housekeeper is actually, what, some kind of professional?" "I was," Sophia said quietly. "Once." The room erupted in questions all at once. How had she ended up here? Why had she stopped playing? Did she have recordings? Training? A career? Sophia looked at their eager faces, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. For 3 years, these people, or people just like them, had looked through her as if she were invisible. Now they couldn't take their eyes off her. "I believe," said the director, cutting through the chatter, "that you owe your employee a bonus, Alexander, and perhaps an apology." Alexander blinked, still processing what had just happened in his living room. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant, and he clearly didn't know how to respond. His usual confidence had vanished. Yes, of course," he stammered. "That was unexpected." Sophia stood up from the piano bench, suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. One piece of music had just changed everything, bridging the world she had left behind with the one she now inhabited. The question was, what happened next? The dinner guests had long since departed, but Sophia couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her small bed, staring at her hands in the dim light from the bedside lamp. Tonight, for the first time in years, her fingers had done what they were meant to do. They had created music instead of just washing dishes and dusting furniture. The memory of playing the Steinway was so vivid that she could still feel the weight of the keys beneath her fingertips. After her performance, the evening had become a blur. The director of the Philharmonic, Thomas Wilson, had peppered her with questions about her training and experience. Diane, the talent agent, had pressed her business card into Sophia's palm with urgent instructions to call her. Even Richard from the record label had looked at her with new interest, no longer seeing just another household employee but a musician worthy of respect. And Alexander. Well, Alexander had been stunned into an uncharacteristic silence. A soft knock on her door pulled Sophia from her thoughts. "Sophia? Are you still awake?" Alexander's voice surprised her. He had never come to her quarters before. "Yes, Mr. Grant," she answered, quickly standing and smoothing down her nightshirt. She opened the door a few inches. Alexander stood in the hallway, still dressed in his dinner party clothes, though he had loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar. He looked different somehow, less sure of himself than usual. "May I speak with you?" he asked, his tone oddly formal. Sophia hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside to let him enter. Her room was small but neat. A single bed, a dresser, and a tiny desk where she wrote letters to her family back home. The contrast between this modest space and Alexander's luxurious bedroom just 1 floor above couldn't have been more stark. Alexander seemed to notice this too as he glanced around. Perhaps seeing her living quarters properly for the first time, he remained standing, looking uncomfortable. "That was quite a performance tonight," he said finally. "Thank you," Sophia replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Why didn't you ever mention you could play like that?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Sophia looked at him steadily. "You never asked." The simple truth hung in the air between them. For 3 years, Alexander had seen Sophia clean his home, cook his meals, and manage his household. but he had never once shown interest in who she was beyond her role as his employee. "Thomas Wilson gave me his card," Alexander said, pulling it from his pocket. "He wants you to call him tomorrow. Says it's important." Sophia nodded. The director had been insistent about speaking with her again. "He's not the only one," Alexander continued. "Half my guests left their contact information for you." He set a small stack of business cards on her desk. "Apparently, I've been employing a world-class pianist as my housekeeper." There was something in his tone. Not quite resentment, but perhaps embarrassment. Sophia realized he felt foolish for not having recognized her talent, for having dismissed her so easily in front of his important guests. "I was good once," Sophia said quietly, "but that was a long time ago." "Not that long ago, clearly," Alexander countered. "You played that piece perfectly. Wilson said it's one of the most difficult in the classical repertoire." Sophia shrugged slightly. "Some things you don't forget. Why did you stop? Why are you—" He gestured vaguely at the room, at her uniform hanging on the back of the door. "Why this instead of concerts?" It was the first personal question he had ever asked her. Sophia sat back down on the edge of her bed, suddenly tired. The adrenaline from the evening was wearing off, leaving her emotionally drained. "My father got sick," she explained. "Heart attack, then complications. The medical bills took everything we had. My mother was already working 2 jobs. My younger siblings were still in school." She looked up at Alexander. "Someone had to help. The conservatory doesn't pay bills." Understanding dawned on Alexander's face. "So you came to America?" Sophia nodded. "My aunt lived in Queens. She helped me get papers, find work. The pay was good here, and I could send money home. My father recovered eventually, but by then you were stuck," Alexander finished for her. "Not stuck," Sophia corrected him. "I made a choice. My family needed me. Music could wait." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, messing up its perfect styling. "But it's been, 3 years you've worked here? All that time you never played? Not even once?" Sophia's eyes drifted to the wall separating her room from the kitchen. "I play when you're not home," she admitted. "Not on the piano, just with my hands. On countertops, tabletops. Anything that feels like keys." Alexander looked stricken by this confession. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. Finally, he straightened his shoulders, businessman once more. "We need to talk about your position here," he said. Sophia felt a flash of panic. Was he firing her? After tonight's display, did he feel uncomfortable having her in his home? "Mr. Grant, Alexander," he interrupted. "After tonight, I think you can call me Alexander." Sophia blinked in surprise but nodded. "Alexander, I hope my playing tonight hasn't caused problems. I'm still the same person I was yesterday. I can still do my job." "That's just it," he said, pacing the small space. "You shouldn't be doing this job. Not when you can play like that." "I need the income," Sophia said simply. "My brother is in his final year of university. My sister just had a baby. The money I send home matters." Alexander stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "What if there was another way? What if you could play again professionally and still support your family?" Sophia gave a small, sad smile. "The music world doesn't work like that. Starting over at 28? After years away? There are hundreds of young pianists graduating from Juilliard every year. Nobody would take a chance on me." "Thomas Wilson might," Alexander countered. "Did you see his face when you played? He looked like he'd discovered buried treasure." "One performance doesn't make a career." "No, but it can restart one." Alexander picked up Wilson's card from the desk and handed it to her. "Call him. Tomorrow. See what he has to say." Sophia took the card, turning it over in her fingers. "And my job here?" "Your job," Alexander hesitated. "Let's talk about that after you speak with Wilson. But know that whatever happens, I'll make sure you can still support your family." With that promise, he turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "The piano is yours to use anytime, even when I'm home." He gave a self-deprecating smile. "Especially when I'm home. God knows it deserves better than sitting there collecting dust." After Alexander left, Sophia lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The business cards on her desk seemed to hum with possibility. Thomas Wilson's contact information felt heavy in her hand, weighted with potential and risk. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, Sophia rose at her usual time. Out of habit, she began her daily routine, putting on coffee, preparing breakfast ingredients, checking Alexander's calendar for the day's appointments. But as she moved around the kitchen, she felt different. The air itself seemed charged with expectation. When Alexander entered, already dressed for work, he looked surprised to see her at the stove. "You're still making breakfast?" he asked. "It's my job," Sophia replied, sliding an omelet onto a plate. Alexander accepted the food but frowned slightly. "Have you called Wilson yet?" Sophia shook her head. "It's only 7. Too early. Call him at 9, Alexander instructed, taking a bite of the omelet. "He's an early riser." Sophia nodded, turning back to the stove to hide her nervousness. What would she even say to the director? "Hello, I'm the housekeeper who played Chopin last night. Remember me?" "I've cleared my morning schedule," Alexander announced, interrupting her thoughts. "I want to be here when you speak with him." Sophia turned in surprise. "You don't need to do that. I'm sure you have important meetings." "Nothing more important than this," he said with unexpected firmness. After breakfast, Sophia cleaned the kitchen and then found herself drawn to the living room, to the Steinway that had changed everything. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the black piano in golden light. Almost reverently, she approached it and lifted the lid over the keys. She sat on the bench, feeling both at home and like an intruder. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before she began to play. Not Chopin this time, but Bach. The prelude in C major, simple and pure, filled the penthouse. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice Alexander watching from the doorway, coffee cup in hand, an unreadable expression on his face. At precisely 9 o'clock, Sophia dialed Thomas Wilson's number, her hand shaking slightly. Alexander sat across from her, giving an encouraging nod. "Mr. Wilson? This is Sophia Reyes from Alexander Grant's dinner party last night." "Ms. Reyes," Wilson's voice boomed through the phone. "I've been waiting for your call. That performance last night was extraordinary." "Thank you," Sophia said quietly. "I won't waste time with small talk," Wilson continued. "The Westfield Symphony needs a pianist for their winter showcase. Their regular performer dropped out for a European tour. It's 6 weeks away, enough time to prepare. I'd like you to audition." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Audition? For the Westfield Symphony?" Alexander's eyes widened and he leaned forward. "Yes," Wilson confirmed. "It's not a permanent position, but it's prestigious. 3 performances, excellent pay, and most importantly, exposure to the right people. If you impress them, and I have no doubt you will, it could open many doors." Sophia gripped the phone tighter. "Mr. Wilson, I haven't performed professionally in years. I don't even have a current repertoire prepared. The showcase program is already set. Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue primarily, with a few other American classics." "Can you play Gershwin?" Sophia nodded before remembering he couldn't see her. "Yes, I studied American composers at the conservatory." "Excellent. The audition is next Wednesday at 10. I've already spoken to the conductor. He's excited to hear you." After getting the details and ending the call, Sophia sat in stunned silence. Alexander watched her expectantly. "Well?" he prompted. "The Westfield Symphony," Sophia said, still processing. "They want me to audition for their winter showcase." A broad smile spread across Alexander's face. "That's fantastic. When?" "Next Wednesday." "Perfect. That gives you a week to practice." Sophia shook her head slowly. "I can't audition. It's been too long. And my duties here are temporarily suspended," Alexander interrupted. "Consider yourself on paid leave effective immediately." "What?" "No, I can't accept that." "You can and you will," he insisted. "For the next week, your only job is to prepare for that audition. The piano is yours. Practice all day if you need to." Sophia stared at him, trying to understand this sudden transformation from indifferent employer to enthusiastic supporter. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. Alexander was quiet for a moment. "Last night I realized something. For 3 years I've had someone with extraordinary talent cleaning my home, and I never once bothered to find out. What does that say about me?" He shook his head. "I can't undo that. But I can help now." Sophia didn't know how to respond. This was a side of Alexander she had never seen. "1 week," he continued. "Give it everything you have. If you get the position, wonderful. If not," he shrugged. "Your job here will be waiting with a substantial raise. Either way, you win." Sophia looked toward the piano, gleaming in the sunlight. 1 week to prepare for an audition that could change everything. 1 week to remember who she used to be, who she might still become. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. For the next 6 days, Sophia lived and breathed music. The penthouse filled with the sounds of Gershwin from dawn until well past sunset, as she reacquainted herself with Rhapsody in Blue. Her fingers, so long confined to domestic tasks, protested at first, growing stiff and sore after hours of practice. But gradually, like waking from a long sleep, her hands remembered their true purpose. Alexander had been true to his word. He'd arranged for a professional pianist to come and coach her, a stern older woman named Irina who had performed with symphonies around the world. Irina pushed Sophia hard, demanding perfection in passages that Sophia had thought were already polished. No, you rush here, Irina would say, tapping the sheet music with a pencil. Gershwin demands space between these notes. Let them breathe. By the 4th day, Sophia's confidence was beginning to waver. The audition was approaching fast, and despite hours of practice, she still struggled with sections of the piece. That evening, she sat at the piano, staring at the keys in frustration after Irina had left. Not going well? Alexander asked, entering the living room with 2 cups of tea. He had been working from home all week, a first in Sophia's experience. Usually, he spent most days at his office downtown. I don't know if I can do this, Sophia admitted, accepting the tea gratefully. Her shoulders ached from tension. It's been too long. My technique is rusty. Alexander leaned against the piano, something he never would have done a week ago. What does Irina say? Sophia gave a small laugh. That I'm both brilliant and terrible. That I play with my heart, but my fingers need to catch up. She sighed. She's right. You still have 3 days, Alexander reminded her. And from what I've heard, you've made incredible progress. Sophia looked up in surprise. You've been listening? Alexander nodded. Between calls. You're playing. It fills the whole penthouse. It's like the place finally has a soul. Sophia felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. The Alexander Grant from a week ago would never have said such a thing. Tell me something, he said, setting down his cup. When you play, what do you think about? Sophia considered the question. I don't think exactly, I feel. The music tells a story and I try to tell it through my fingers. She looked at the sheet music spread before her. Rhapsody in Blue is about America, its energy, its contradictions, the chaos and beauty of city life. When Gershwin wrote it, he was on a train, inspired by the rhythm of the wheels on the tracks. Play it again, Alexander said. But this time close your eyes. Don't think about the notes or what Irina said. Just tell the story. Sophia hesitated, then positioned her hands over the keys. She closed her eyes and began to play. This time she didn't worry about technical perfection. Instead, she thought about her own journey. Leaving Columbia, arriving in New York, the years of working and waiting and dreaming. The familiar opening clarinet glissando, which she played on the piano in this arrangement, soared like a question mark hanging in the air. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find Alexander watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. That, he said quietly, was what Irina's been trying to get from you. You stopped playing the notes and started making music. Sophia realized he was right. For the first time since she'd begun practicing, she had felt truly connected to the piece. Thank you, she said, meaning it. Alexander nodded, suddenly looking uncomfortable with the sincerity of the moment. Well, I should get back to work. Keep going, that was really something. The next day, Sophia practiced with renewed confidence. When Irina arrived, the older woman noticed the difference immediately. You've broken through, she said approvingly after Sophia played through the most challenging section. Now we can really work. The day before the audition, Alexander surprised Sophia by bringing her a gift, a tailored black dress suitable for performing. You can't audition in your uniform, he said with a small smile, handing her the box. The saleslady said this is what concert pianists wear these days. Sophia opened the box carefully. The dress was elegant but simple, nothing flashy or attention-seeking. Perfect for letting her music be the focus. It's beautiful, she said, touched by the gesture. There's something else, Alexander added, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. I took the liberty of getting you these. Inside the envelope were plane tickets, one to Bogota dated the following month, and return tickets for 3 people. I don't understand, Sophia said, confused. Whether you get the symphony position or not, I think it's time you saw your family, Alexander explained. The return tickets are for your parents. I thought. Perhaps they'd like to see where you live now. Maybe hear you play. Sophia stared at the tickets, overcome with emotion. It had been 3 years since she'd seen her family in person. They spoke by video call, but it wasn't the same. Why are you doing all this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted dusting furniture and making beds, he said finally. And because he struggled to find the words. I've been unfair, blind. I've treated you as if you were invisible and you're anything but. Sophia didn't know how to respond. This was a different Alexander than the one she'd worked for all these years. A man capable of admitting his mistakes and trying to make amends. Thank you, she said simply. It wasn't enough, but it was all she could manage without her voice breaking. The morning of the audition arrived cold and clear. Sophia had barely slept, her mind racing with passages of music and worries about what lay ahead. Alexander insisted on driving her to the symphony hall himself, rather than calling his usual car service. For luck, he said, holding the door for her as she slid into the passenger seat of his rarely used Aston Martin. The drive through the city was quiet. Sophia watched the buildings pass, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd worn the black dress with her hair pulled back in a simple style that Irina had suggested. Nervous? Alexander asked as they approached the concert hall. Terrified, Sophia admitted. Good, he said with a smile. Irina says that means you care. The symphony hall loomed ahead, its grand architecture a stark reminder of what Sophia was walking into. This wasn't a casual performance at a dinner party. This was a professional audition with one of the country's most respected orchestras. In the lobby, they were met by Thomas Wilson, who smiled broadly at the sight of Sophia. Ms. Reyes, right on time. He extended his hand to her, then nodded at Alexander. Mr. Grant, I didn't expect to see you here. Moral support, Alexander replied. Will that be a problem? Wilson shook his head. Not at all. The conductor and 3 members of the selection committee are waiting in the main hall. They're very eager to hear Ms. Reyes play after what I told them. Sophia shot him a nervous look. What exactly did you tell them? Wilson smiled kindly. Only that they should keep an open mind, that sometimes extraordinary talent comes from unexpected places. He led them through a side door and into the concert hall itself. Sophia had never been inside such a space before. The soaring ceiling, the rows of empty seats, and at the center of it all, a magnificent grand piano on the stage, its lid raised and ready. 4 people sat in the front row, 3 men and a woman, all with notepads. One of them, a gray-haired man with glasses, stood as they approached. Ms. Reyes. He extended his hand. I'm Robert Chen, conductor of the Westfield Symphony. Thomas has told us quite a story about you. Sophia shook his hand, trying to keep her own from trembling. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Chen. Please, he gestured toward the stage. The piano is ready when you are. Take a moment to warm up if you'd like. Alexander gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. You've got this, he whispered before going to sit several rows behind the selection committee. Sophia took a deep breath and walked up the steps to the stage. The concert hall seemed to grow larger with each step, the ceiling higher, the empty seats more numerous. The piano waited like a challenge. She sat on the bench, adjusting its height and distance from the keys, actions that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. The committee watched silently as she played a few scales to get a feel for the instrument. It was a beautiful piano, its action lighter than the Steinway at Alexander's penthouse. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Reyes, called Robert Chen. We'd like to hear Rhapsody in Blue, starting from the solo piano entrance after the orchestral introduction. Sophia nodded, positioning her hands. Then she closed her eyes just for a moment and thought of her family back in Colombia. Of her father's pride when she'd given her first recital. Of her mother's sacrifice to pay for lessons. Of the path that had led her from concert halls to cleaning houses and now, improbably, back again. She began to play. The music flowed through her as naturally as breathing. The jazzy rhythms of Gershwin's masterpiece filled the concert hall, bouncing off the walls and ceiling, returning to embrace her. Sophia let herself be carried by the piece, her fingers finding the keys without conscious thought. The technically challenging passages that had given her such trouble during practice now unfolded effortlessly. She played with her whole body, swaying slightly with the music's pulse, her face reflecting every emotional nuance of the piece. This wasn't just an audition, it was a homecoming, a return to the person she was always meant to be. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Sophia opened her eyes to find all 4 committee members staring at her. Robert Chen's pen had frozen mid-note. The woman beside him had a hand pressed to her mouth. From the back of the hall, Alexander began to applaud, the sound echoing in the vast space. Robert Chen cleared his throat. "Ms. Reyes, could you play the 3rd movement of the Tchaikovsky Concerto No. 1? Just a few minutes of it." Sophia hadn't prepared this piece, but she had performed it many times in the past. She nodded and began to play from memory, letting her fingers find their way through the familiar territory. This was a test to see how versatile she was, how quickly she could adapt. After a few minutes, Chen raised his hand. "That's enough, thank you." The committee members huddled together, speaking in low voices. Sophia remained at the piano, her heart pounding. She glanced back at Alexander, who gave her an encouraging thumbs up. Finally, Chen approached the stage. "Ms. Reyes, would you be available for a rehearsal with the full orchestra tomorrow morning?" Sophia blinked in surprise. Yes, I would." "Excellent," he said with a smile. "The position is yours if you want it. 3 performances, as Thomas mentioned. The pay is standard union rate for soloists, which I believe he discussed with you." Sophia felt lightheaded. "Thank you, Mr. Chen, I'd be honored." "Don't thank me," he replied. "Thank your talent, and perhaps Mr. Wilson for bringing you to our attention. We'll see you tomorrow at 9. As the committee gathered their things and filed out, Sophia remained at the piano, unable to move, trying to process what had just happened. Alexander bounded up to the stage, his face split by the widest grin she had ever seen from him. "You did it," he exclaimed. "I did it," Sophia echoed, still stunned. "They want me to play. With the orchestra, tomorrow." Alexander laughed. "Of course they do. Sophia, you were magnificent." She stood from the piano bench on shaky legs. "I can't believe this is happening." "Believe it," Alexander said firmly. "This is just the beginning." As they walked out of the concert hall into the bright midday sun, Sophia felt as though she were stepping into a new world, or perhaps returning to one she had been forced to leave behind. Either way, nothing would be the same again. "What happens now?" she asked as they reached Alexander's car. He looked at her over the roof of the Aston Martin. Now we celebrate. And tomorrow you begin your new life." "And my old one? My job at the penthouse?" Alexander smiled. "I think we both know you've outgrown that position. But don't worry about your family. The financial support will continue until you're established. And you'll always have a home with me if you need it." Sophia looked back at the concert hall, then at Alexander, the unlikely catalyst for this extraordinary turn in her life. "I don't know how to thank you." "Play," he said simply. "That's all the thanks I need. Play and let the world hear what I was lucky enough to discover in my own home." 6 months had passed since Sophia's audition, and her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Tonight was the culmination of that journey, her debut solo recital at Carnegie Hall. Sophia stood in the wings of the legendary venue, peering out at the audience filling the seats. The hall's warm lighting cast a golden glow over everything, making the scene look almost dreamlike. She smoothed down the front of her emerald green gown, a far cry from the black dress she'd worn for her audition, and worlds away from the uniform she'd worn as Alexander's housekeeper. 5 minutes. "Ms. Reyes," whispered a stagehand, clipboard in hand. Sophia nodded, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. Even after months of performances with the Westfield Symphony, culminating in rave reviews and this solo opportunity, she still couldn't quite believe this was her life now. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down to see Alexander's name on the screen. "Front row center. Brought someone special." Sophia smiled, wondering who he meant. In the months since her audition, Alexander had become something she never expected, a genuine friend. He had kept his promise, continuing to support her financially until the symphony payments began, and had even helped her find a small but comfortable apartment near Lincoln Center. She still spent time at his penthouse, though now as a guest rather than an employee, often playing his Steinway while they talked about music, her career, or his latest business ventures. The stagehand appeared again. "It's time, Ms. Reyes." Sophia took one final deep breath and walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was thunderous. The hall was packed. a testament to the buzz that had been building around her since videos of her Westfield Symphony performances had gone viral online. The Maid Maestro, they had called her in the beginning, a nickname she had initially resented but had come to embrace as her story inspired others. As she took her bow, Sophia's eyes found Alexander in the front row, clapping enthusiastically. Beside him sat an older man with silver hair and a woman with Sophia's same warm brown eyes, her parents. Sophia's heart leapt at the sight of them. Alexander had arranged for them to fly in from Colombia for her Carnegie Hall debut, but she hadn't been sure they would make it in time. Her mother wiped tears from her eyes while her father beamed with pride. They had arrived just that afternoon, their first time in New York, their first time seeing their daughter perform in nearly 4 years. Sophia settled at the piano, adjusting the bench and taking a moment to center herself. The program tonight was ambitious: Bach, Chopin, and Rachmaninoff in the first half, Gershwin, Ginastera, and her own composition in the second. It told the story of her journey, from her classical training, through her rediscovery of music, and her new identity as both a traditional pianist and an innovative voice. She began with Bach's Prelude in C major, the same piece she had played that morning on Alexander's piano when her life had changed. The simple, flowing notes filled Carnegie Hall with their timeless beauty. Sophia closed her eyes, letting the music carry her and the audience away. As she played through her program, each piece carried memories. The Chopin reminded her of the dinner party where Alexander had dared her to play. The Rachmaninoff recalled her earbuds tucked away as she dusted Alexander's art collection. The Gershwin brought back the nerve-wracking audition that had reopened the door to her musical career, but it was her own composition that meant the most tonight. Titled simply Return, it wove together influences from her Colombian heritage with classical structures and jazz-inspired harmonies, a musical biography of her journey from Bogota to New York, from concert halls to cleaning houses and back again. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of profound silence before the hall erupted in applause. Sophia rose from the bench, overwhelmed by the standing ovation that greeted her. Flowers were brought out, and she accepted them with a deep bow, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Later, after the performance, a small celebration was held in a private room at a nearby restaurant. Thomas Wilson was there, beaming like a proud teacher. Diane, the talent agent who had been at Alexander's dinner party, raised her glass in a toast. She now represented Sophia and had negotiated the recording contract that would take Sophia to studios in Berlin next month. Even Irina, the stern piano coach, allowed herself a rare smile as she congratulated her former student, but it was the reunion with her parents that meant the most to Sophia. Her mother couldn't stop touching her arm, as if to make sure she was real. Her father kept shaking his head in wonder. "When you left home," he said in Spanish, his voice thick with emotion, "I feared you were sacrificing your gift forever. I carried such guilt for that." "Papa, no," Sophia insisted, taking his weathered hands in hers. "I made a choice. The right choice. Our family needed help. And now look at you," her mother marveled. "Playing at Carnegie Hall, the same stage as all the great musicians in history." Alexander approached with fresh drinks. Over the months, he had insisted on learning some basic Spanish phrases to communicate with Sophia's family. Much to her amusement and appreciation, "Señor and Señora Reyes," he said with careful pronunciation. "Your daughter is amazing." He switched back to English, which Sophia translated. "You should be very proud." "We are," Sophia's father replied in his limited English. "Thank you for helping her." Alexander shook his head. "I didn't help her. I just got out of her way." He smiled at Sophia. She did all the hard work herself. Later, as the celebration continued, Sophia found a quiet moment with Alexander near the window overlooking the city lights. "I never properly thanked you," she said, "for everything." Alexander looked uncomfortable, as he often did when the conversation turned sincere. "You don't need to thank me. Hearing you play is thanks enough." "Still," Sophia insisted, "that night when you dared me to play, you could have just been embarrassed afterward. You could have fired me. Instead, you changed my life." "You're giving me too much credit," Alexander said, swirling the ice in his glass. "I was just correcting a mistake. The mistake of not seeing who was right in front of me all along." "Well, whatever your reason, I'm grateful." Sophia glanced back at her parents. now chatting animatedly with Thomas Wilson through a translator. Look how happy they are. Have you told them? Alexander asked. Sophia nodded. About the foundation? Yes, my father cried. The Sophia Reyes Musical Foundation had been Alexander's latest project, a non-profit dedicated to identifying talented musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds and providing them with training, instruments, and performance opportunities. The initial funding had come from Alexander himself, but other donors had quickly joined after hearing Sophia's story. Good tears, I hope, Alexander said. The best kind. Sophia smiled. He couldn't believe that children in our old neighborhood would have opportunities that were once impossible. That's all you, Alexander said. I just provided some money. Your story is what inspires people. Sophia was about to respond when Diane approached, apologetically interrupting. Sorry, Sophia, but that reporter from the New York Times is here for your interview. Should I tell her to wait? Sophia shook her head. No, I'll come now. She turned back to Alexander. Duty calls. Go be famous, he said with a grin. The interview took place in a quiet corner of the room. The reporter, a thoughtful woman with quick eyes, had already done her research on Sophia's unusual path to Carnegie Hall. Your story has captivated so many people, she began. The talented pianist who became a housekeeper, only to be rediscovered by chance. It's like something from a movie, Sophia smiled. Life is full of unexpected turns. What was going through your mind when you sat down at your employer's piano that night? Were you nervous, scared? Sophia considered the question. Both. But mostly I felt defiant. For years I had set aside that part of myself, the musician. But when he challenged me, something just woke up. And now here you are with a sold-out Carnegie Hall debut and a recording contract. Does it feel like vindication? Not vindication, Sophia corrected gently. Restoration. Like finding a piece of myself that had been missing. The reporter nodded, making notes. Your former employer, Alexander Grant, has become one of your biggest supporters. He's funding your foundation, attending your performances. How would you describe your relationship now? Sophia glanced across the room at Alexander, who was attempting to communicate with her mother despite the language barrier, making her laugh with his exaggerated hand gestures. We're friends, she said simply. Equal friends. That's the most unexpected gift of all this. And what's next for Sophia Reyes? The reporter asked. After the recording sessions in Berlin? Sophia smiled. A tour of South America. I'm starting in Bogota, at the theater where I gave my first recital as a student. My old music school will be bringing students to the performance. We're coming full circle, the reporter observed. Yes, but also making a new path forward. I'm commissioning works from Colombian composers, pieces that blend classical traditions with our native music. I want to build bridges between worlds. After the interview concluded, Sophia rejoined the celebration. The night grew late, but no one seemed eager to leave. There was a sense of magic in the air, of possibilities expanding in all directions. Near midnight, Sophia slipped away from the group and walked to the window. The city sparkled below, a constellation of lights against the darkness. She thought about the Sophia from a year ago, the woman who dusted furniture and cooked meals and played piano only in her imagination. That woman could never have dreamed of this moment. She felt a presence beside her and turned to find Alexander. Penny for your thoughts, he said. Sophia smiled. I was just thinking about how strange life is. How one moment, one decision can change everything. Like daring your housekeeper to play the piano, Alexander asked with a wry smile. Exactly like that. Sophia turned to face the room, taking in the sight of her parents, her new colleagues, her new life. A year ago, I thought I knew who I was and what my life would be. I had accepted it. But underneath, the music was always there, waiting. It always will be, Alexander said. That's your gift. No, Sophia corrected him. The gift is getting a second chance to share it. From across the room, Thomas Wilson clinked a spoon against his glass, calling for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, it's getting late, but I think we have time for one more performance if our guest of honor is willing. He looked at Sophia expectantly. What do you say? One more piece to end the night? Sophia looked around at the faces turned toward her. Her parents, Alexander, her new friends and colleagues. People who saw her not as the help but as who she truly was. She nodded and moved toward the small grand piano in the corner of the room. As her fingers touched the keys and music once again filled the air, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged, not hidden away in someone else's home, but here in the light, playing for all to hear.